I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Marius de Vries, composer for CODA. Marius, this score features beautiful piano and string elements, which I'm such a sucker for because they always elicit this very strong emotion. Why do you think they're so effective in eliciting emotion in such a visceral way?
I mean, strings are just a go-to standard emotional instrument, not so much perhaps in the way that they sound, but because of the history that they have as being central to narrative film music. But I think the instrumentation here was very much suggested by the simplicity of tone that we were going for in the movie as a whole, and that in turn was driven by the fact that the performed music in the movie is recorded all live on set and very simply. There's not a great deal of clever, or invisible orchestration going on top of those. And so in order for the score to kind of dovetail with that, especially in a movie where the first half is almost absent any score, because we wanted to let the deaf communication scenes play clear of music to begin with. So the sort of what you're experiencing as the emotional simplicity of the arrangements was really dictated by the fact that they had to work with the performed music, and also by the fact that as we discovered what it meant to have a relationship between emotionally supportive music and effectively silent dialogue scenes, it's a very different experience to writing under dialogue. And we found ourselves working very hard to try and do the job as simply as possible.
Yeah,
and sometimes, sometimes the simplest way of presenting a cue when it needs to sound organic is to go to piano and a small string section, which feels like, base camp for all of the bigger things you can do.
That's right, exactly. And given this film is about a deaf family and their daughter who yearns to sing, I was conscious that the score did take a bit of a backseat towards the beginning of the film, and then really starts to ramp up as she starts to find her calling, so to speak.
Yeah,
so
that's
were there any...
that wasn't what we started out doing. I mean, I didn't want to seem lazy to Sian, who and I was working with her for the first time, so I wrote all the way through it. But then it became sculpting. We just were taking stuff out entirely at the beginning, and the cues in the second half were too complicated and over orchestrated. So we started to thin those out, and eventually we found a shape where, as you said, the score kind of starts to bleed subliminally into the film. And then by the time she's finding her feet as a singer and a musician, you start to notice the fact that the musical world of the film has become richer.
Yeah, I'm glad that ended up being quite intentional, because it really allowed us to immerse ourselves in this world that many of us aren't really familiar with. The score is very uplifting, though. For example, the track "Going to Boston" is one of my faves. Can you talk us through the primary inspiration for designing a track like "Going to Boston," which is very uplifting, and it's kind of pretty emblematic of what the score represents to listeners like myself?
Going to Boston and that later cue that's called "Wait, Wait, Stop, Stop," they're kind of two of the longer cues in the second half. And we've got a movie which is so full of songs, either performed or needle dropped, that I kind of wanted the longer major score cues to also feel written in that language. So those cues are composed in sort of songwritery blocks, like you could imagine a verse, bridge, chorus sort of map of those cues, and I just wanted to do that so that there was a link between the needle drops and the score, and it didn't feel like we were just careering between narrative songs and super flexible underscore.
Yeah.
I wrote those from with a bit of a songwriting head on, and then sort of edited them into place. So that was the first point of inspiration, and the second was really just to stick with a very uncomplicated, organic sort of choice of instrumentation, because that kind of reflects the thoroughness with which Sian approached every department in the film in terms of authenticity and striving for, streamlined and simple storytelling.
And yet, like you say, uncomplicated. Some of the uncomplicated melodies created for a film like this are super effective. So there's a really rich kind of ambient string element to some of the tracks, like Ruby's theme. The piano always evokes that emotion, as we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I also started thinking, looking back at your career, you've had a very varied career. You've written, arranged, produced across a wide range of styles and genres. Would you say CODA is perhaps the closest you've come to, as you say, an uncomplicated traditional orchestral score for a film?
Yeah, totally. And it was difficult to begin with because I guess in a lot of what I've done, it's been loud and complex and strange and sometimes abrasive, and this was Sian really encouraged me to pare that back, and I think that was good for me. It's a truism which I'm sure we'd all agree, which is that sometimes simplicity is the most difficult thing to achieve, and it's a thing which you become successful at a lot later than some of the more extravagant gestures that we're all capable of. So that's one of the reasons I valued this project. And moments where I'd be sitting down sort of playing a cue back for Sian, and she'd say, it's kind of all right, but we just need to simplify it. And eventually sometimes it would just be one piano note and she'd say, you're close, but it's still too much. There's only one place to go from there.
Basically, all right, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
But I wonder also, given that this is not necessarily in your wheelhouse and you really had to stretch as a musician, or not even stretch, but kind of compact yourself, so to speak.
Yeah.
Were there any scenes in particular, especially towards the end of the film, that you struggled with because you wanted to go big, as you say, and then you were pared back to something that you're not comfortable with normally?
It was never a struggle because it was just such a healthy and positive and friendly collaboration, both with Sian and with my production partner on this film, Nikolai. So it was never painful, but it was certainly challenging. And I'd written so much music for the film by the time that we started to zero in on this approach that I was never stuck for ideas, because there was always something there. It was just always too big and too long and too wide and too loud and those things. So it was always possible to pare something down out of what we had, but there was a lot of hard work and attention that went into that that throwing away of elements.
Yeah, was it ever not challenging in terms of how you're going to get to it, but letting stuff go, given that you're accustomed to innovating and being different and loud, as you say, maybe even slightly abrasive or unexpected? Is it difficult as a composer to let stuff go and just kind of pare back something that you've created?
Yeah, it can be difficult, but it's also such a good lesson. I mean, none of us are paid really, honestly, to show off. We're there at the service of something greater than ourselves, and this was a great reminder of that.
And finally, you've mentioned needle drops. I think in this day and age, a lot of scores seem to be really intertwined with what the music supervisor is bringing to the movie as well, when they come up with these amazing songs that many of us either don't know or that trigger memories. So Is it a difficult process, especially someone of your experience, to really ensure that the compositions that you're creating are perfectly melded with these needle drops that are coming through the film?
Yeah, I think back to the first movie that I ever worked on in any substantial way, which is Romeo and Juliet, which was an exercise in exactly that. So I mean, I learned from a master in working with Baz Luhrmann, and so in a way, not only do I find that not problematic, but that's become very much part of the currency in which I work, is the balance between score and songs and the way they can talk to each other, and indeed the way that you can take either melodic or textual elements from the songs and use that in the score so that something gets woven together that makes sense as an overall piece. So I got thrown into a very deep end back in 1995 or whenever it was on that movie, and I learnt from that.
Yeah. Yeah, just bringing me back to that film. That was such a highlight.
25
Marius, thank you so much for
years.
25 years. I remember being in the cinema. I was just a young boy. Marius, thank you for joining us today. We want to bring you back for our group panel chat shortly.
Absolutely, my great pleasure.